had my doubts the moment we left Earth's atmosphere. The G-forces pushed me back into my seat as our transport craft broke through the clouds, but it wasn't the physical pressure that bothered me. It was everything they weren't telling us. "First time off-world, Captain Reyes?" Kennedy asked from the seat beside mine, her voice steady despite the violent shaking of our cabin. "Second," I said, keeping my eyes on the small window where blue sky gave way to the blackness of space. "Did a 6-month stint on the International Space Station as part of joint military training." Kennedy nodded and returned to studying her tablet. That was her way. Ask a question, file away the answer, move on. I appreciated her efficiency. The 5 of us sat strapped into the military transport. Myself, Kennedy Santos, our science specialist, Cindy Romero, security and tactical, Billy Dominguez, engineering, and Atticus Warren, communications. An elite team handpicked for Operation Artemis, what they told us would be humanity's first permanent lunar base. I knew better than to believe the official story. Military careers teach you to read between the lines. The briefing we'd received back on Earth had been frustratingly light on details. Colonel John Kim stood at the front of a windowless room at Vandenberg, his face giving away nothing as he clicked through slides of orbital mechanics and supply chain logistics. "Operation Artemis represents the next leap in our space program," he'd said, his voice carrying that distinct military cadence that left no room for questions. "You 5 have been selected based on your exceptional service records and specific skill sets. The mission parameters are classified at the highest level." Billy raised his hand. "Sir, with all due respect, we're going to need more than that if we're supposed to build a lunar base." Kim's expression didn't change. "You'll receive full operational details once you reach Lunaris Station. Security protocol." Cindy caught my eye across the table and raised an eyebrow. We'd worked together before. She knew when something didn't add up. The transport docked with the orbital transfer station 12 hours after launch. We floated through the connecting tube in single file, our duffel bags bumping against the walls as we adjusted to microgravity. "Welcome to the halfway point," Atticus said, his natural enthusiasm bubbling through even as he tried to maintain military decorum. "Next stop, lunar orbit." The lunar shuttle was waiting for us, sleeker and more advanced than anything I'd seen in service before. No windows except in the cockpit, and even those were small, reinforced affairs that suggested this craft made regular trips through radiation-heavy zones. "This is new tech," Billy whispered as we strapped in. His eyes darted around the cabin, taking in details only an engineer would notice. "Some of these systems aren't even in the prototype stage according to public records." "Focus on the mission, Dominguez," I said, though privately I agreed with his assessment. Whatever Lunaris was, it had serious backing and funding beyond what a simple lunar base would require. The journey to lunar orbit took another day and a half. We slept in shifts, ate packaged meals, and reviewed the limited mission data we'd been given. None of us mentioned the obvious gaps in the information. When we finally saw Lunaris, it wasn't what any of us expected. "That's not a lunar base," Kennedy said, stating the obvious as we peered through the cockpit windows. "That's a full orbital station." Lunaris hung above the moon's cratered surface like a spider, a central hub with 8 extending arms, each capped with what looked like specialized modules. Solar panels stretched out in carefully aligned arrays catching the unfiltered sunlight. The whole structure gleamed white and silver against the gray backdrop of the lunar surface. "Looks like we've been misinformed," I said, keeping my voice neutral despite the anger building inside me. I hated being kept in the dark, especially when my team's safety was on the line. The docking procedure took longer than standard protocols suggested it should. Multiple authentication checks, radiation scans, and a bizarre 30-minute holding pattern where our shuttle simply waited while something on the station was presumably prepared for our arrival. When we finally docked and the airlock cycled open, a woman waited for us on the other side. Tall, with auburn hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful, she wore a lab coat with the name Gutierrez stitched above the pocket. "Captain Reyes," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Dr. Bailey Gutierrez, Chief Scientist. Welcome to Lunaris." I shook her hand. My team and I were under the impression we'd be building a lunar base, not joining an already operational station. Bailey's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, well, operational details change. Colonel Kim will brief you fully now that you've arrived. If you'll follow me." The station corridors were narrow but immaculate, with that particular smell of recycled air and metal that all space habitats share. Crew members in various uniforms, some military, some civilian, stepped aside as we passed, their eyes lingering on us with an odd mixture of curiosity and what looked almost like pity. Bailey led us to a conference room with a large viewing window facing the lunar surface. Colonel Kim was already there, standing at the head of the table with his hands clasped behind his back. "Team," he said with a nod, "please be seated." We took our places around the table. I noticed cameras in each corner of the room and what looked like a signal jammer attached to the ceiling. Whatever we were about to hear, they wanted it contained. Operation Artemis is not, as you were led to believe, a lunar colonization project, Kim began without preamble. Lunaris Station has been operational for 3 years, and its purpose is far more specialized. He nodded to Bailey, who tapped something on her tablet. The lights dimmed and a holographic display appeared above the table, a complex web of energy signatures surrounding the station. 5 years ago, we discovered something unique about this particular lunar orbit, Bailey said. There's an electromagnetic field here generated by a combination of factors we still don't fully understand. Lunar composition, solar radiation patterns, and Earth's magnetic influence all play a part. She zoomed in on a particular section of the field. What makes this field special is its effect on human consciousness, particularly memory patterns and personality imprints. I felt my stomach tighten. This wasn't a construction mission. It wasn't even standard military operations. In simple terms, Bailey continued, the field allows us to contact what we call echoes, persistent fragments of deceased individuals. Their personalities, memories, and emotional patterns remain accessible under the right conditions. The room went silent. Billy laughed nervously, then stopped when no one joined him. "You're talking about ghosts," Cindy said flatly. Bailey winced. "We avoid that terminology. These are electromagnetic patterns that the human brain encoded during life. They're not supernatural. They're scientific phenomena we're only beginning to understand." "And our mission?" I asked, already guessing the answer. Kim took over again. "Your mission, Captain Reyes, is intelligence gathering. These echoes retain all the knowledge they possessed in life. Some belong to individuals with access to highly sensitive information. Foreign agents, scientists, political figures. Information that could be vital to national security." "You want us to interrogate the dead," Kennedy said. It wasn't a question. "We want you to communicate with these echoes and extract useful intelligence," Kim corrected, though the distinction seemed meaningless. "Captain Reyes will lead each session with support from the rest of you according to your specialties." I looked around at my team. Atticus appeared troubled, Kennedy curious, Billy openly skeptical, and Cindy. Cindy was watching me, waiting for my reaction. "This wasn't what we signed up for," I said, meeting Kim's eyes directly. "You signed up to serve your country in whatever capacity required," he replied without hesitation. "This is what's required. Unless you're refusing a direct order, Captain." The threat was clear. I thought about everything we'd given up to come here. The months of specialized training, the families and friends we'd left behind with only vague explanations about a classified mission. Walking away now wasn't an option. "When do we start?" I asked. Kim's expression remained neutral, but there was something like satisfaction in the way he straightened his shoulders. "Dr. Gutierrez will take you to the preparation room immediately. Your first session is scheduled for 800 tomorrow. That gives you 18 hours to review the protocols and rest." Bailey stood up, tablet in hand. "If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your quarters first, then the preparation facilities." As we filed out of the conference room, Cindy fell into step beside me. "What do you make of this?" she asked, her voice low. "I think they're hiding something even bigger than what they just told us," I said. Our quarters turned out to be small but private rooms arranged along a circular corridor. Each had a bed, desk, storage locker, and a tiny bathroom. Standard space station accommodations, but newer than what I'd experienced on the ISS. "Get settled, then meet in the common area in 30 minutes, I told my team. "We need to talk before we go any deeper into whatever this is." In my room, I unpacked quickly and sat on the edge of the bed. The reality of our situation was sinking in. We weren't here to build anything. We were here to extract information from the dead, or whatever these echoes really were. The scientific explanation sounded plausible enough, but my instincts told me we were messing with something we didn't fully understand. 30 minutes later, we gathered in the small common area between our rooms. No one looked happy. "This is crazy," Billy said as soon as we were all seated. "Electromagnetic patterns of dead people? That's not science, it doesn't matter what we call it," Kennedy interrupted. "What matters is whether it works, and if it does, what the ethical implications are." "Ethics went out the airlock when they lied to get us here," Cindy said. Atticus, who had been quiet until now, leaned forward. "I'm more concerned about safety protocols. If we're dealing with something that can affect human consciousness, what safeguards are in place to protect us?" He had a good point. "That's what we need to find out," I said. "When we meet with Gutierrez again, we ask questions, lots of them. We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with before any of us goes near these echoes." Bailey came for us an hour later. She led us through sections of the station we hadn't seen during our arrival. Laboratories filled with equipment I didn't recognize, monitoring stations where technicians tracked complex data patterns, and finally to a room she called the interface. "This is where the contact happens," she explained. The room was circular with a single chair in the center, surrounded by monitoring equipment. The walls were lined with what looked like insulation material, and a glass observation booth stood to one side. "The subject, that would be you, Captain Reyes, sits here," Bailey said, placing her hand on the chair's headrest. "We use a combination of the natural field and our own technology to facilitate the connection. The rest of your team will monitor from the observation room along with our staff." "What exactly happens during a session?" I asked. Bailey hesitated for the first time since we'd met her. "It's difficult to describe. Each person experiences it differently. Some report it as a conversation, others as more of a shared consciousness. The echoes aren't always coherent or cooperative." "And how do you select which echoes to contact?" Kennedy asked. "We have a database," Bailey said. "Individuals whose knowledge would be valuable to national security. Some were foreign agents, others were scientists working on classified projects. A few were high-ranking officials in hostile governments." "Dead spies," Cindy said bluntly. Bailey didn't contradict her. "Tomorrow morning we'll start with someone relatively straightforward, a former engineer who worked on a missile defense system. His echo has been stable in previous contacts." "Previous contacts?" I asked. Who was making contact before us? Other operatives, Bailey said vaguely. This program has been running for some time. And where are those operatives now? Atticus asked. Bailey's expression closed off. Some have completed their rotation and returned to Earth. Others are still stationed here but assigned to different projects. She was lying. I could see it in the way she wouldn't meet our eyes, in the slight tension in her shoulders. Something had happened to the previous teams and they weren't telling us what. We should get some rest, I said to my team, though rest was the last thing on my mind. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Back in my quarters, I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about what we'd gotten ourselves into. The military had sent me into dangerous situations before, but this felt different. Uncharted territory with rules no one fully understood. I tried to imagine what it would be like to connect with the consciousness of someone who was dead, what it might do to a person to experience that repeatedly. Sleep didn't come easily, but eventually I drifted off, my dreams filled with strange voices and the feeling of being watched. Morning came with the artificial lighting of the station gradually brightening to simulate dawn. I showered, dressed in the new uniform they'd provided, dark gray with the Lunaris insignia on the shoulder, and met my team for breakfast in the small mess hall. No one had slept well. Billy's hands shook slightly as he picked at his food. Kennedy was quieter than usual, her analytical mind no doubt running through all the scientific possibilities. Cindy kept scanning the room, cataloging exits and potential threats out of habit. Atticus tried to maintain conversation, but his usual easy charm was strained. Whatever happens today, I told them, we stick together. We watch each other's backs. This isn't a standard mission, but we're still a team. At precisely 0800, Bailey came to escort me to the interface room. The others would follow separately to the observation booth. As we walked, I noticed more details about the station. The lack of personal items or decorations, the way certain areas were clearly off limits, the cameras watching every corridor. One last question, I said as we approached the interface room. What happens if something goes wrong? Bailey paused at the door. There's an emergency protocol. If we detect any unusual patterns or if you show signs of distress, we'll terminate the connection immediately. Has that happened before? She pushed open the door without answering. Inside, technicians were making final adjustments to the equipment. The chair in the center looked more intimidating than it had yesterday. Please take a seat, Captain, Bailey said. We'll begin in 5 minutes. I sat down and a technician attached small sensors to my temples and wrists. Through the glass of the observation booth, I could see my team watching, their faces tense with concern. As the technicians stepped back and the lights dimmed, I took a deep breath and prepared myself to meet the dead. The first contact session started with a clinical coldness that didn't prepare any of us for what came next. Charles Morrison moved around the equipment with practiced hands, checking readouts and adjusting dials while Marcus Richards stood near the door, hand resting on his holstered weapon. Electromagnetic field stable at 60%, one of the technicians called out. I watched from behind the observation glass, my clipboard forgotten in my hands. The air in the room felt charged, not from the equipment but from the collective tension of everyone present. Increasing to 75%, Morrison said, his voice steady as if we were just running another routine test. The lights in the chamber dimmed slightly. A faint blue glow began to spread from the central platform. At first, I thought it was some kind of electrical discharge from the equipment. E-field stabilized, beginning primary sequence, Morrison announced. What happened next made me question everything I understood about reality. In the center of the room, where the blue light grew most intense, something began to take shape. It started as a vague outline like heat rising from pavement. Then it solidified, just enough to recognize human features. A man appeared. Not fully there, I could see through him to the wall behind, but unmistakably human. Tall, imposing, with white hair and a military bearing even in his translucent state. He wore what looked like an old dress uniform, complete with medals across his chest. "Theodore Bishop," Morrison whispered, though his microphone carried the words clearly to us in the observation room. The figure's head turned toward the sound, its movements jerky like footage played at the wrong speed. Its mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Oh, holy shit," someone behind me muttered. I couldn't look away. We were seeing a man who had been dead for decades. The session lasted only 8 minutes before the figure dissolved back into nothing. Morrison shut down the equipment with the same methodical care he'd shown starting it. But his hands shook slightly now and sweat beaded on his forehead. In the debriefing room afterward, no one seemed to know what to say. We had just proven the impossible. Communication with the dead was real. The following weeks blurred together as we conducted session after session. Each time, the echoes, that's what the science team called them, grew more distinct, more present. I sat in on my 5th session, 3 weeks after first contact. The echo of a woman who had worked at the facility in the 1970s actually responded to questions, nodding or shaking her head. By the 7th session, they could speak, their voices thin and distant like bad radio reception, but clearly answering simple questions. "They're developing faster than we expected," Bailey Gutierrez told me after one particularly successful interaction. "The electromagnetic field somehow acts as a conduit for something. Consciousness, memory, we don't know yet." What troubled me wasn't just what the echoes were, but what they were becoming. During week 6, I watched an echo correctly identify objects it couldn't possibly have seen during its lifetime. It knew about computers, smartphones, and even referenced recent world events. These weren't just recordings of dead people. They were learning, adapting, growing more aware each time we made contact. They retain core memories and personality traits, Dr. Gutierrez explained during a briefing. But they're also absorbing new information from us somehow. By the 8th week, the echoes started asking questions of their own. Personal questions, questions that made people uncomfortable. What happened to my daughter? An elderly woman's echo asked a junior researcher whose face went white. How did I die? Another wanted to know. The real turning point came during session 12. I still have nightmares about it. Casey Patterson was operating the monitoring station that day. She was good at her job, quiet, efficient, kept to herself. I didn't know much about her personal life, just that she joined the project about 6 months earlier. The echo that day was particularly strong. A middle-aged man who had worked at the facility during the early experimental phase. He materialized more clearly than any we'd seen before, almost solid-looking in the center of the chamber. Everything seemed routine until Casey made a small adjustment to one of the monitors. The echo's head snapped toward her with unnatural speed. "You're afraid," it said, its voice suddenly clearer than we'd heard before. "I can feel it. So much fear. Just like when you were little." Casey froze, her hand still on the dial. "You were so small," the echo continued, moving closer to her. "Hiding in the closet while she screamed at your father. Covering your ears when she came for you next." "Stop," Casey whispered. "The belt, the cigarette burns, the locked bathroom. You remember, don't you?" Casey screamed, a raw, primal sound that made my skin crawl. She collapsed, clutching her head as if trying to keep something from bursting out of it. "She's having a seizure," someone yelled. Richards moved fast, dragging Casey away while Morrison shut down the equipment. The echo lingered for several seconds after the power cut, its mouth twisted in what looked disturbingly like satisfaction before it finally faded. Later, when Casey could speak again, she told us through tears that she hadn't just heard the words. She'd re-experienced her childhood trauma as if it were happening all over again. The echo had somehow forced the memories directly into her mind, more vivid than any normal recall. It was feeding on it, she said, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. I felt it, enjoying my pain. That was when we knew for certain. These echoes weren't passive remnants. They were entities capable of psychological attacks, growing stronger by feeding on emotional responses. They were predators, and we were their prey. But the worst was yet to come. Billy Dominguez joined the project as a technical consultant about a month after I arrived. Smart guy. Brilliant with the equipment, always making improvements to the electromagnetic field generators. He had this nervous energy about him, talked fast, moved fast, like his brain worked too quickly for his body to keep up. During session 15, Billy was adjusting the field parameters when Theodore Bishop's echo returned. It had been weeks since we'd seen this particular echo, and it appeared stronger than ever. The missing calibrations from 1983, the echo said, staring directly at Billy. I know where they are. Billy looked up, interested despite the protocols about limited engagement. What calibrations? The ones that would complete your work, the echo said. I can show you. Richard stepped forward. Dominguez, maintain protocol. But Billy was already moving closer to the chamber's edge. How? How would you know about my work? The echo smiled, the first time I'd seen one make such a human expression. I know everything about you, William. Your fears, your ambitions, the cancer growing in your mother's brain that you're trying to outrun with your research. Billy went white. He hadn't told anyone about his mother's diagnosis. I only learned about it later. I can help you, the echo whispered. Let me in, and I'll show you. What happened next still plays in slow motion in my memory. Billy reached toward the echo as if hypnotized. The translucent figure reached back, and where their hands should have met, there was a pulse of blue light. Billy's back arched. His eyes rolled back. His mouth opened in a silent scream. Then he collapsed. Richards got to him first, started CPR immediately. The medical team rushed in less than a minute later, but it was already too late. Billy Dominguez was pronounced dead from cardiac arrest at 3:42 p.m. The autopsy showed no pre-existing heart condition, no drugs in his system, nothing that explained why a healthy 28-year-old's heart would simply stop. Nothing except the echo. I expected the project to shut down after that. Any reasonable person would look at a dead body and say, that's enough. But Dakota Walls wasn't reasonable. This is unfortunate, he said during the emergency meeting called after Billy's death. He stood at the head of the conference table, not a hair out of place, not a hint of emotion on his face. But we need to maintain perspective. We're making unprecedented breakthroughs here. A man is dead, I said, unable to keep quiet. Walls looked at me with cold gray eyes. People die in pursuit of scientific advancement, Captain Reyes. They always have. The nuclear program, space exploration, medical research, all have casualties. Dominguez knew the risks. He didn't sign up to be killed by a ghost, Richard said, his jaw tight. An echo, Walls corrected. And we don't know that's what happened. The stress of the work. We all saw what happened, Dr. Gutierrez interrupted. Walls straightened his jacket. What we have here is potentially the most significant intelligence asset in history. Direct access to deceased military leaders, scientists, anyone whose knowledge we need. The strategic implications alone justify continuing. At what cost? I asked. Whatever cost is necessary, Walls replied without hesitation. Dominguez was unfortunate. We'll implement additional safeguards. That night, I started keeping my own records. Not the sanitized reports Walls wanted filed, but the truth. detailed accounts of every session, every interaction, every sign that these echoes were becoming something dangerous. I hid my notes in encrypted files backed up in multiple locations. Someone needed to document what was really happening here because I was starting to think none of us would make it out to tell the story ourselves. The station's decline was hard to miss. Little things at first, missed shifts, arguments in the mess hall, people jumping at shadows. I watched the crew fragment in real time, like a glass hit with a hammer but still holding its shape before the cracks ran their course. I found Abigail Gomez in her lab, surrounded by data printouts and empty coffee cups. Dark circles hung under her eyes and her hair stuck out at odd angles like she'd been running her hands through it for hours. "Captain Reyes," she said when I walked in. "Good timing. I need to show you something." She pulled up a series of readings on her monitor. Waves and patterns I couldn't make sense of filled the screen. "The electromagnetic field we've been using to contact the echoes, it's not just enabling communication." She tapped a section of the display where the waves peaked dramatically. "It's feeding them, sustaining them." "What exactly does that mean?" I asked, leaning closer to the screen. "They're getting stronger, more physical." Abigail rubbed her eyes. "The longer we keep the field active, the more solid they become. At first they were just impressions, voices, images. Now what? People report seeing them walk through walls, objects moving, cold spots so intense they burn skin." She looked up at me. "We didn't just make contact with these things, we're helping them cross over." I straightened up, trying to process what she was telling me. "Can we shut it down? The field?" "That's the problem. The equipment's supposed to generate a controlled field, but readings show it's become self-sustaining. Something's changed in the fundamental structure of space around the station." She lowered her voice. "And I don't think Dakota or Hamilton want it shut down anyway. They keep pushing for more contact sessions." A call came through on my comm before I could respond. "Captain, we've got a situation in Maintenance Section D," Santos's voice crackled. "Armstrong went in to check a ventilation issue 20 minutes ago. He's not responding to comms." "On my way," I said. 3 hours later, we found Teddy Armstrong. He wasn't in Maintenance Section D at all, but tucked into a corner of an unused storage room 2 decks below, curled into a ball like a child hiding from monsters. "Armstrong," I said, crouching beside him. "Teddy, can you hear me?" His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. His lips moved constantly, forming words too quiet to hear. I leaned closer. "What happened? Who did this to you?" "In the walls," he whispered. "They live in the walls. They showed me. They showed me everything." I looked at Santos, who stood by the door, her hand on her sidearm. "Get Dr. Singh down here now." Teddy's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. His grip was ice cold and surprisingly strong. "They're not dead, Captain. They were never dead. That's what we got wrong." "Who, Teddy? Who's not dead?" "The echoes." His eyes finally focused on mine, wide with terror. "They're not human. They never were." Dr. Sadie Singh arrived with a medical kit and 2 assistants. She took one look at Armstrong and pulled out a sedative. "How long has he been like this?" she asked, preparing the injection. "No idea. He went missing 3 hours ago." I stood back as she administered the shot. "What's wrong with him?" Physically, nothing obvious." She checked his pupils with a pen light. "But his heart rate is through the roof and he's showing signs of extreme stress response. Almost like shock, but..." She frowned. "Different. I need to get him to medical for a full workup." Armstrong went limp as the sedative took effect. But even as he lost consciousness, his lips kept moving, forming those same silent words over and over. "What's he saying?" I asked. Singh leaned down, watching his mouth. I think they're coming through. The station turned into a war zone after that, but not the kind with weapons and clear enemies. This battle was fought inside people's heads. Crew members reported seeing things. People they knew were dead, creatures that couldn't exist, visions of home that vanished when they reached for them. Sleep became a luxury no one could afford. The nightmares were too real, too vivid. People walked the corridors with hollow eyes and twitchy movements. Some stopped talking altogether. Others wouldn't stop, rambling about voices and visions and warnings. I tried to maintain order, to keep everyone focused on their jobs, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with my bare hands. Then Lincoln Gutierrez, one of the junior researchers, found me in the mess hall. He sat down across from me, placed his sidearm on the table between us, and spoke in the calmest voice I'd heard in days. "I talked to my daughter last night," he said. I knew his file. His daughter had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. She told me how we all die. He smiled, tears streaming down his face. "Every person on this station she showed me, it was so beautiful, Captain, so perfect." I reached slowly for the gun. "Lincoln, I think you need to see Dr. Singh." "No need." He picked up the gun before I could reach it. "I already know what happens next." I lunged across the table, but I was too late. The sound of the shot rang through the mess hall, followed by screams and chaos. Lincoln slumped forward, still wearing that peaceful smile. I took my turn monitoring the communications center that night. We were supposed to maintain hourly check-ins with Earth, standard protocol when a mission showed signs of instability. Not that anyone on Earth seemed particularly concerned about our reports of crew members losing their minds. Vicky Glass, our systems analyst, was already there when I arrived, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she accessed communication protocols. "Everything okay, Glass?" I asked, noting the sweat on her forehead despite the room's cool temperature. "They're going to abandon us," she said without looking up. I saw it. Mission Control's planning to cut us loose. "That's not going to happen," I said, trying to sound confident. "We just need to..." A shower of sparks erupted from the main relay panel as Glass yanked out a handful of circuitry. The emergency lights kicked on, bathing the room in red. "What the hell are you doing?" I grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the controls. "Saving us." Her eyes were wild, unfocused. "They showed me what happens if Earth can still reach us. They'll remote trigger the station's self-destruct. They're going to bury what happened here." I restrained her until security arrived to take her to the medical bay. The damage was done, though. Our primary communication relay was fried. We still had emergency channels, but they were limited to basic text transmission. We were effectively cut off. With chaos spreading through every section of the station, I needed answers, not the kind Dakota or Hamilton would provide. They were too invested in whatever the hell they'd been trying to achieve here. I needed the truth. I used my command codes to access the research database, looking for anything that might explain what was happening. Most of the files were locked behind security I couldn't crack, but some of the daily logs were accessible. I started with the earliest entries from when the station first began detecting the strange signals. There had to be something there, some clue they'd missed or ignored that would explain how a scientific research mission had turned into a nightmare. As I scrolled through file after file, a pattern began to emerge. The signals hadn't been random. They'd been responses, answers to questions the scientists hadn't even asked yet. Whatever these echoes were, they hadn't just been discovered by the station. They'd been waiting for us. I found Bailey's research logs buried in a restricted subfolder that shouldn't have existed. The station's backup system ran daily archives of all research data, but these particular files sat in an isolated partition marked Contingency Documentation. The oldest entries dated back 8 months, long before our team arrived. Come on, I muttered, scrolling through the files. Most were technical, filled with electromagnetic readings and energy pattern analyses. But as I dug deeper, the tone of her notes changed. Subject 17 showed independent cognition today, responded to stimuli not presented. This suggests they aren't simply recordings but possess some form of awareness. Incredible breakthrough. I kept reading, my jaw clenching tighter with each entry. The connection grows stronger when we adjust the field harmonics. Too strong sometimes. Nurse Lou complained of headaches after yesterday's session. I've increased safety protocols, but we can't slow down now. The next entry made me stop cold. 3 more staff reported auditory hallucinations. Wilson insists someone whispered his childhood nickname, one his dead mother used. I've told Dakota we need to pause, but he says we're too close to breakthrough. He's right, of course. I can control this. I know I can. She knew. She fucking knew what was happening here. I flipped through more entries, watching her descent into obsession. They want something from us, not just contact. They need us for something. Dakota says I'm getting too personally involved. But he wasn't there when Echo 26 named my stillborn daughter. How could it know that? Unless they've always been here watching us. The final entry was dated just 3 days ago. I understand now. They exist in a state of pure consciousness, untethered from physical form. What we perceive as hauntings or possession are really their attempts to experience corporeality again. With the right electromagnetic field, we can provide stable vessels. Dakota says the military applications are beyond our imagination. He's thinking too small. This isn't about weapons, it's about transcendence. I closed the logs and sat back. Bailey Gutierrez had known exactly what she was doing. She hadn't just discovered the echoes. She'd invited them in, convinced she could control them. I needed to find her. Now. Bailey was alone in the main lab when I walked in. She stood with her back to the door, working at a terminal. Her auburn hair pulled tight in its usual severe bun. "You knew what would happen," I said, letting the door close behind me. She didn't turn around. "Captain Reyes, I was wondering when you'd come looking for answers. I found your research logs. You knew the echoes were affecting the crew. You knew people were getting sick, hearing things, and you kept pushing anyway." Bailey's shoulders rose and fell with a deep breath. "Science requires sacrifice, Captain, always has." "Sacrifice?" I took a step closer. "People are dying. Lucas Wilson is practically catatonic. Derek Martinez shot himself. This isn't sacrifice, it's negligence. Criminal negligence." She turned to face me, and I noticed something off about her eyes. They didn't track quite right, like she was looking at me and through me at the same time. "You military types," she said, her voice oddly flat. "Always so limited in your thinking. This is the most important discovery in human history. You need to shut it down," I said. "Whatever field you're generating, whatever's letting these things in, it needs to stop. Now." Bailey's head tilted at an unnatural angle. "They just want to live again, Captain. Is that so wrong? To want to feel, to exist? Bailey, we've been so alone." Her voice changed, deeper now, with a resonance that made my teeth hurt. "So cold, so empty, for so long." I took a step back. "Bailey, fight it. Don't let them." "Bailey understands." Another voice now, higher, childlike. "Bailey helps." Bailey opens the door. Her body jerked, head snapping back, then forward. When she looked at me again, her face was contorted in a grin that stretched too wide. "You'll help too," she said, but it wasn't one voice. It was many, layered on top of each other, a horrifying chorus coming from one throat. "Everyone helps. Everyone joins. Everyone becomes home." She lunged at me with unnatural speed. I barely had time to raise my arms before she slammed into me, knocking me back against a lab table. Equipment crashed to the floor. Her hands closed around my throat, impossibly strong. I struck out, catching her in the side. She didn't even flinch. I hit her again harder and managed to break her grip enough to shove her back. She staggered but stayed upright, still smiling that terrible smile. "You can't stop us," the voices said. "We're already here. We're in the walls, in the air, in your friends, soon in you." I backed toward the door, my mind racing. The electromagnetic field, that's what Abigail had discovered. The echoes needed it to maintain their presence, to possess people. And the strongest electromagnetic field on the station was the reactor core, I whispered. Something flickered across Bailey's face. Fear, maybe. The real Bailey trying to surface. "No," the voices said. "You don't understand what you'll destroy." I turned and ran. Behind me, Bailey let out an inhuman wail that became many voices screaming at once. The corridors had descended into chaos. 2 technicians wrestled on the floor, one trying to gouge out the other's eyes. A woman in a lab coat stood perfectly still, staring at the wall, whispering to it. Blood smeared the white surfaces where someone had painted symbols I didn't recognize. I rounded a corner and nearly collided with Cindy. She had her sidearm drawn, a wild look in her eyes. "Captain, thank God." She grabbed my arm. "It's everyone. They're all losing it. Warren tried to push Kennedy out an airlock. I had to..." She swallowed hard. "I had to put him down." "It's the echoes," I said. "They're possessing people, using them. We need to get to the reactor control room." "What? Why?" "The electromagnetic field, it's what's keeping them here. If we overload the reactor, create a massive EM pulse..." Understanding dawned on her face. "It could disrupt whatever's letting them stay. Or destroy them completely." A shot rang out, and sparks flew from the wall beside us. Down the corridor, Marcus Donovan stood with his service weapon raised. His eyes were black pits. "Take cover!" Cindy shoved me into a recessed doorway and fired back twice. Marcus jerked as the rounds hit him but kept coming, firing wildly. "I'll cover you," Cindy said. "Get to the reactor. I'll meet you at escape pod bay 3. "Cindy..." "Go now!" I ran as Cindy laid down, suppressing fire. More shots echoed through the corridor. More screams. The station was tearing itself apart. I fought my way through 3 more sections, dodging possessed crew members and helping the few who seemed unaffected. The lights flickered and emergency klaxons began to sound as systems throughout the station failed or were deliberately sabotaged. When I finally reached the reactor control room, the door was sealed. I punched in my override code. Nothing. I tried again. Still locked. "They don't want you in here, Captain." Bradley Foster's voice came through the intercom. "They've promised us something better than life. Better than death. Immortality. Bradley, listen to me. They're lying to you. They're using you. No, you don't understand." His voice took on a dreamy quality. "I've seen it. We become part of them. They become part of us. No more death, no more loss, just togetherness. Forever. Open the door, Bradley." "I can't do that." I pulled out my sidearm and fired at the control panel. Sparks flew and the door slid open halfway, then stuck. I forced my way through the gap. Bradley waited inside, a metal pipe in his hands. His eyes were normal, which was somehow worse. He'd chosen this. "Don't make me hurt you," he said. I raised my weapon. "Put it down!" He charged instead. I fired, but he was fast, knocking my arm aside. The shot went wide. The pipe connected with my shoulder, sending pain shooting down my arm. I dropped the gun. We grappled, crashing into consoles and equipment. Bradley was strong but desperate. I was trained. I caught his next swing, twisted the pipe from his hands, and struck him across the face with it. He went down hard. I stumbled to the main control panel, blood dripping from a cut above my eye. The self-destruct sequence required 2 verification codes. I had mine. I needed a second. Bradley groaned, trying to get up. I kicked him back down. "Your code, Bradley, now. They'll kill me if I help you. They'll kill everyone if I don't stop them." He looked up at me, blood streaming from his nose. For a moment I saw clarity in his eyes. Fear. Regret. 917 Alpha Delta 4, he whispered. I punched it in along with my code. The screen flashed red. Self-destruct sequence initiated. 15 minutes to core breach. Alarms blared throughout the station. Red emergency lights bathed everything in a bloody glow. "I'm sorry," Bradley said as I retrieved my weapon. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. I ran. The station was coming apart. Fires had broken out in at least 2 sections. The artificial gravity fluctuated, making running difficult. I passed bodies in the corridors, some dead, some alive, but not themselves anymore, writhing and speaking in jumbled voices. "Cindy!" I shouted as I approached Escape Pod Bay 3. "Cindy, where are you?" "Here." Her voice came from inside the last functioning escape pod. "Hurry!" I sprinted the final distance as the station groaned around us. The outer hull was starting to buckle from stress fractures. We had minutes, maybe less. I dove into the pod where Cindy waited at the controls. Blood stained her uniform, but she looked steady. "Reactors set to blow," I gasped. "We've got less than 10 minutes. She sealed the hatch and punched the launch sequence. "Hold on!" The pod shuddered, clamps releasing. For a horrible moment, nothing happened. Then we were moving, pulling away from the dying station. Through the viewport, I watched Lunaris Dakota grow smaller. The first explosions bloomed silently from its southern quadrant, followed by a larger blast that took out an entire section. The electromagnetic field that had sustained the echoes and doomed the station was collapsing. "Did we kill them?" Cindy asked quietly. I watched as the station's reactor finally breached, a blinding flash that lit up space like a newborn star. "I don't know," I said, "but they're not following us." The shockwave hit our pod, sending us tumbling into the darkness of space. Our escape pod tumbled through space, its stabilizers fighting to correct our course. The violent shaking had stopped at least. Emergency lights bathed everything in dull red. The life support systems hummed, a sound I'd never been so happy to hear. I took a deep breath. For the first time since landing on that damn station, I felt like I might actually live through this. "They can't follow us now," I said, turning to Cindy. She sat perfectly still, her head tilted at an odd angle. Her eyes were open but didn't seem to focus on anything. "Cindy?" I unbuckled my harness and pushed off toward her. "Are you hurt?" Her mouth opened, but the voice that came out wasn't hers. "Captain Reyes." It was deeper, masculine. I froze halfway across the pod. "We've been waiting for you." This time her voice sounded like a woman's, older with a slight accent I couldn't place. "Cindy, what's wrong with you?" I reached for the emergency med kit mounted on the wall. Her head snapped toward me with a jerky motion. "Nothing's wrong with Specialist Romero." This voice belonged to a young man. "We're just getting comfortable." My stomach dropped as I realized what was happening. The echoes. Somehow they'd come with us. "How many of you are there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Cindy's face split into a wide smile that didn't belong on her features. "Enough," she said, now in a child's voice. "Enough to start again?" I backed away until I hit the opposite wall. "You can't leave the station, that's not how it works." "Rules change," she said, her own voice returning briefly before shifting to another. "We adapt, we learn, we grow." The pod's warning system kicked in, a mechanical voice announcing, "Atmospheric entry imminent. Secure all loose items. Brace for deceleration. I grabbed a handrail as the pod started to shake. Earth's gravity was pulling us in. Through the viewport, I saw the blackness of space give way to the burning orange of re-entry. Cindy, or whatever was using her, watched me with empty eyes. Earth has so many minds, so much potential. You won't get the chance, I said, though I had no idea how to stop them. Whatever you are, you won't spread here. She laughed, a chorus of voices overlapping. We already have. The pod shook harder as we hit the upper atmosphere. Temperature warnings blared. The heat shield was working, but barely. I should have strapped back in, but I couldn't take my eyes off Cindy. How did you get out? I asked. The containment fields were designed by humans who didn't understand what they were containing, she answered, this time in what sounded like Dr. Bailey's voice. Did you really think we were trapped there by accident, Captain? The realization hit me like a physical blow. The station. It was all a setup. You wanted us to come. Cindy nodded slowly, her head moving too far to one side. A door needs someone to open it. The pod jolted violently, throwing me against the ceiling. I heard something crack, the hull or my ribs, I wasn't sure. Warning lights flashed everywhere. The computer announced, parachute deployment failure. Backup systems engaged. I managed to drag myself back to my seat and strap in. Through the window, I caught glimpses of blue, the Pacific Ocean. We were coming in too fast. We're going to crash, I told Cindy, who hadn't moved despite the violent shaking. She smiled again. Only the beginning. The backup chutes deployed with a jerk that made the whole pod swing wildly. Too late, too fast. The ocean rushed up to meet us. I braced myself, arms crossed over my chest, head down. The impact came with a deafening crash. Water sprayed through a crack in the hull. The pod bobbed once, twice, then started to sink. Water poured in faster now. I fumbled with my harness, fingers numb with adrenaline and fear. The cold hit me as the water reached my waist. I looked across at Cindy. She sat motionless, still strapped in, water rising around her. Her eyes met mine. "See you soon, Captain," she said in a dozen voices at once. The pod lurched sideways. More water rushed in. I took one last breath as it covered my head. The emergency hatch was just above me. I pulled the release lever, praying it would work. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the pressure equalized and the hatch popped open. I pushed through it, kicking hard toward what I hoped was the surface. My lungs burned, my vision darkened at the edges. Then air. Blessed air. I broke the surface with a desperate gasp, coughing and sputtering. The pod was gone, sunk beneath the waves. Cindy with it. I treaded water, scanning the horizon, nothing but ocean in every direction. The sun beat down from a clear blue sky that seemed to mock our nightmare. A noise caught my attention, a distant thumping. I turned toward it and saw a helicopter approaching, then another. Navy rescue. The first helicopter hovered while a diver dropped into the water. She swam toward me with powerful strokes. "Captain Reyes," she shouted over the noise of the rotors. "I'm Lieutenant Bradley. We're going to get you out of here." She secured a harness around me, and soon I was being lifted out of the water. As I rose, I looked down at the spot where our pod had sunk. Bubbles still rose to the surface. "There's another survivor," I tried to tell them when I reached the helicopter. "Cindy Romero, she's still down there." "We've got divers looking," Bradley told me, wrapping a thermal blanket around my shoulders. "But you're our priority right now." They flew me to a naval vessel waiting nearby, where medical staff checked me over. Broken ribs, mild hypothermia, cuts and bruises. I kept asking about Cindy but got only vague answers. 3 days later, I woke up in a private room at Westridge Military Hospital. White walls, beeping monitors, the smell of antiseptic. A man sat in a chair beside my bed, writing in a notebook. "Captain Reyes," he said when he noticed I was awake. "I'm Dr. Lynch. How are you feeling?" "Did they find Cindy?" I asked, my voice rough. He hesitated just long enough for me to know the answer before he spoke. "I'm afraid not. The recovery team found the pod, but it was empty. Empty. That meant the echoes were loose." "I need to talk to someone in charge," I said, trying to sit up. Pain shot through my chest. "Right now. It's important." "Easy," Lynch said, pressing a button to raise the head of my bed. "You've been through a traumatic experience. We need to make sure you're stable before debriefing." "You don't understand," I insisted. "Something came back with us, something dangerous." Lynch made a note in his book. "Can you tell me more about that?" I opened my mouth to explain, then stopped. The way he watched me, pen poised over paper. He didn't believe me. He thought I was traumatized, delusional. Maybe I was. "Captain?" he prompted. I sank back against the pillows. "How long have I been here?" 5 days total. You were transferred from the Naval Hospital 2 days ago." 5 days? How far could the echoes spread in 5 days? "I need to see my team," I said, "the ones who briefed us before the mission." "Commander Kim has been notified of your recovery," Lynch said. "He'll be here when you're cleared for visitors." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Lynch asked a few more questions about how I was feeling, then left me to rest. That night I woke to whispers. The room was dark except for the glow of monitors. I turned my head toward the bathroom door where a sliver of light showed underneath. The whispers grew louder. Not words exactly, but something close. I stared at the mirror on the wall opposite my bed. For a split second, I saw a face that wasn't mine looking back at me. I blinked, and it was gone. The next morning, I told Lynch I'd slept through the night. What was the point? He already thought I was losing it. Maybe I was. But I knew what I'd seen on that station. I knew what had happened in that escape pod, and somewhere out there, whatever had taken over Cindy was free. I lived to tell what happened at Lunaris. But as I lay in that hospital bed, surrounded by people who thought they were keeping me safe, I couldn't shake the feeling that surviving might have been the worst mistake I'd ever made. The nightmare hadn't ended when Lunaris exploded. Something much worse had just begun.